Hello, and welcome to Pitt Street Research. My name is Stuart Roberts, and I'm one of the co-founders of our firm. And joining me on the morning of Tuesday, the 23rd of October, 2024, from near Tumut in southern New South Wales, is Dr. Paul MacLeman, who's the Executive Chairman of Island Pharmaceuticals, ASX ILA. Paul, good morning.
Morning, Stuart.
It's been a very good year for Island Pharmaceuticals. We've now got ahead of steam on the PROTECT phase 2 study for ILA-101, your flagship drug in dengue. In addition to which, we're in due diligence now on picking up a potentially very good program in the whole protection space called Galidesivir. We'll start with ILA-101. Talk to us about the background for that product and how it's travelled since you picked it up in phase 2.
So the molecule was discovered through a screening program at Monash University in one of their biological schools, obviously. The group in question was screening molecules to look for activity against flaviviruses, which are mosquito-borne viruses, and came up with fenretinide, which is our molecule, which we call ILA-101. Turns out that when they looked more deeply into the history of this molecule, it had been developed by J&J as an anti-cancer drug. It had been in a number of clinical trials, 45 in fact, in phase 1 and phase 2, against a variety of tumours, blood tumours and also solid tumours. Had a very clean safety profile, no significant side effects at all in any of those studies. Turns out it just wasn't a very good anti-cancer drug. So it had extensive clinical history. It had been in front of the FDA, multiple INDs in different cancers. J&J then decided to cease work on that molecule and handed it off to the National Institutes of Health, the National Cancer Institute, in fact, who sat on it for a while. When we approached them, they were very helpful and basically gave us their data, and also pointed us towards the Army, who have also been very supportive of our program because they have a high level of interest in dengue because of their overseas deployments of troops into tropical and subtropical areas
Right.
at that point in time. It's obviously now spreading into more temperate regions, but that's as global warming or global climate change gets ahead of steam up, it is moving into other areas.
Exactly.
So through the course, I IPO'd the company about 3 and some years ago. Had some more FDA interactions. They asked us that we do a single ascending dose study, which we executed on with very little fuss at the beginning of this year. We went back to FDA and showed them that data, and they agreed that we were free to move into phase 2. And so we've now commenced the phase 2A study, which is the prophylactic or preventive arm of our phase 2. And so over the course of 12 months, a small company like us will be executing on 2 clinical trials in one 12-month period, which is quite remarkable. And then obviously early next year, we'll be moving into phase 2B, which is a therapeutic model for the molecule where we infect the candidates first and then start treating them with drug once they start to show some clinical signs. So we'll, by the early stage of next year, have had another safety study, 2 phase 2 clinical trials, and be ready to talk to the FDA about moving into phase 3.
It's remarkable to me that in 2024 there are not great tools available to physicians when they're treating dengue, and that's despite, as you say, of there being a huge prevalence in the tropics, and more importantly, in more temperate zones. Hardly a month goes by where I don't read somewhere that dengue's shown up in, say, Florida or North Queensland, and it's moving progressively into cooler zones. And yet the standard of care is, watch and wait is a little bit of an exaggeration. You'll be the first decent drug for the treatment of for the treatment of dengue, should you succeed with Island's clinical program.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah. So really the standard of care at the moment is fluids and anti-inflammatories, OTC anti-inflammatories, really no good options. That's usually fine for your first infection with one strain of the virus. The problem with dengue comes in second and subsequent infections if it's with a different strain of the virus. There's 4 different strains of dengue virus. There's a low but significant chance in those subsequent infections that you can have an aberrant immune response, which basically upregulates the damaging parts of the immune system and can lead to a syndrome called hemorrhagic fever, which is potentially lethal. So that first infection, you'll be quite sick. You'll have shivers and shakes and rashes and potentially gastrointestinal effects. But in second and subsequent infections, it can be a much more serious disease.
Right. And with ILA-101, we've got broad spectrum activity against a range of flaviviruses, not just dengue. So there's potentially a pipeline just in this one molecule.
Yeah, that's correct. So all of the ones that people would have heard of, so yellow fever, chikungunya, West Nile virus, we've shown activity in animal models against animal or cell line models against all of those flaviviruses. And so potentially once we get an approval for a first indication, ideally dengue, then the process of extending that label claim into other similar viruses, other flaviviruses, would just be undertaking, obviously the clinical studies. You wouldn't be going back to square one to do preclinical and safety work in humans. So it would be a much more expedited path to market once you got the first approval. Right. And obviously that first approval in dengue, and in fact a lot of these viruses which are on the tropical disease list, is eligible for priority review voucher, which your viewers may be already aware of. But basically, it's an incentive scheme from the FDA to encourage development of underserved diseases. They issue you an expedited review on a subsequent program. Most small companies like us then on-sell that voucher to a third party who can use it to expedite their next blockbuster drug. So think about it, getting Ozempic on market 6 or 12 months early. That has value for a big pharma company. These vouchers trade usually around $100 to $110 million US each, fairly regularly, although the last one that transacted for $158 million US.
And this is not the first priority review voucher that well, it is the first, but there are more where that came from. Let's turn our attention to Galidesivir. Molecule that has shown some activity in the past against, and obviously this is in vitro and in vivo, against Ebola and Marburg. Potentially useful to protect people against those really deadly viruses. Let's talk about Galidesivir. How did it come to your attention, and what's the state of play right now?
So we some time ago flagged a desire, and we made this public at the time, that we were looking for a second program to broaden our pipeline and obviously de-risk the company somewhat. So we proactively engaged some virologists to assist us to come up with a list of viral diseases that were underserved or unserved, that were amenable to grant funding, and a whole host of other characteristics that were synergistic to our company. As people would be aware, we have a lot of advisors and a lot of expertise internally dealing with Army and Homeland Security type agencies, particularly in the US, and so we were tilted towards those sorts of programs as well. So part of our criteria was looking at companies that had programs in those sorts of viruses, those sorts of disease states, and also as part of our criteria, companies that had flagged a change in their strategic direction that meant that was no longer a core asset for them. Long story short, we reached out to 12 or 15 different companies, cold called them basically, had bites from about 3, entered into negotiations with the company in question that currently owns Galidesivir, BioCryst. We've had very productive discussions with them, and we now have a binding letter of intent to move to an option agreement on that to enable us to take that program on as our own program, which we are moving forward with at the moment through a due diligence process to look at what might be involved to move that product down the chain. I should also add that while the most advanced data with this molecule is in non-human primates and obviously human safety studies, but in non-human primates in these very deadly hemorrhagic diseases, there's also extensive animal data in a whole range of RNA viruses. So it's a very versatile antiviral molecule, if you like, with lots of different indications possible once we can move it forward towards a registration.
Right. So in the next few months, subject to you completing your due diligence, that program will become part of Island. Now, it's very interesting. Ebola is not something you can run a double-blind placebo-controlled study in ethically. So the FDA a long time ago came up with the so-called animal rule that we test products like this in non-human primates. If it works, it then becomes approved. We've seen it in smallpox. Currently, there's no agent that can protect against Ebola and Marburg. You would be the first in that regard. What that suggests is a fairly speedy program if things go according to plan.
Yeah, we obviously, as part of our due diligence and subsequent to acquiring the molecule, would need to go back and confirm all of those arrangements with FDA. It may well be people would be aware that in certain underserved cancers you get an approval at a phase 2 with the understanding that you will then, after you've been approved and are selling the product, that you will then still undertake a phase 3. I suspect we may be looking at the same sort of arrangement with these viruses, although we could be pleasantly surprised and it's just one and done with the non-human primate studies. But certainly there's precedent in 15 other drugs that have been approved, most of them nasty Homeland Security military-focused diseases. So there is precedent. It's not an unused rule. It's been used many times for approval of drugs for diseases that are difficult to do human clinical trials. As you say, it's the language from FDA is where it's unfeasible or unethical to conduct human studies, and they're not all infectious agents. There's been drugs approved for cyanide, radiation sickness, a variety of other things as well. Where similarly, it's fairly hard to run human studies where you have to irradiate somebody or give them cyanide.
Right. So, regrettably, we live in a dangerous world, and obviously, bioterrorism has been a thing for a long time. I think back to 2001, the scare over anthrax at that time. So, U.S. government's response, and by extension, the rest of the world, stockpiling the drug so that it's available in the event that there's a bioterrorist incident. Commercially, that's actually good for companies like you. Good for the rest of us because of the biopreparedness issue. But look at some of the orders that companies like what Island will become have received. They could add it into the hundreds of millions. It's reasonable.
Yes, it just depends on the agent, but yeah, that's correct. The other interesting thing with these sorts of molecules, where it is likely to be predominantly a stockpile market, is if you think about the dengue program, it's very hard for a small company to market a single disease or single molecule product portfolio. You can't spread the costs of all of the support mechanisms that you need in terms of the Sunshine Act and pharmacovigilance and safety monitoring, sales forces, all of that sort of stuff. It's very hard to do that with one molecule, where you actually are going to have to market the molecule to various agencies and purchasers. If you're looking at a stockpile drug, it's not outside the bounds of possibility that a very small company could actually keep the commercial end of this product and actually sell it. In other words, if you're not having to run a sales force, you're not having to run a pharmacovigilance, all of those ancillary functions that a pharmaceutical company needs, and all you're doing is resupplying a stockpile whenever the expiry date comes up for the drug. Basically, all you're managing is just, key account management with whatever government agencies you're dealing with and whoever the manufacturer is, and you're cranking the handle on another manufacturing run every couple of years and selling it. So, we would have the option of on selling this or on licensing it, but I think when the time came, you'd have to take a fairly serious look about whether you could actually keep it and actually be a seller of the drug into these stockpile markets.
Right. So plenty going on at Island at the moment. We'll be looking at for completion sooner rather than later of the Galidesivir due diligence. You're getting your first data from phase 2A potentially before Christmas for dengue, and then it's on to 2025 with progress on both programs.
Correct. Yes. No, it's a very exciting time for the company.
Paul MacLeman, well done to you and the team for the way in which you've engineered this company for success. Having known you now for the best part of 20 years, I expected no less, because you have a habit of showing up in companies that have had some challenges and fixing them, as does your wife that many people will know, Dr. Sue MacLeman. Sorry, no, she's not doctor. You're Dr. MacLeman. She's Mrs. MacLeman, right?
Correct.
the dream team in Australian life sciences. Well done on what you've achieved at ILA, and good luck for 2025.
Thanks so much, Stuart. Wonderful to talk to you.